Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
She is an associate professor of anthropology at Stockton University. She's also an author. Today on Rainbow Country, Laurie Greene joins me to talk about her latest book, Drag Queens and Beauty Queens, Contesting Femininity in the World's Playground. That and more on episode 290, so stay tuned. The Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hi, this is Emily Saliers from Indigo Girls.
Hey everyone, this is Chris Harder, porn star, burlesque performer, and the creator of Porn to Be a Star. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT-FM in Toronto, and now proudly in syndication on 12 outlets across Canada. From coast to coast to coast. The Yukon, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, the east coast of Canada in Newfoundland, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Well, thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together, we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, a #1 podcast on Podomatic.com's Gay and Lesbian chart, as well as being recognized as Canada's #2 LGBT podcast on Feedspot.com. So today, Associate Professor of Anthropology and author Laurie Greene joins me to talk about her latest book, Drag Queens and Beauty Queens. We'll find out about the iconic beauty pageant that started in 1921, the Miss America pageant, and its drag sister, so to speak, that started in 1994, the Missed America pageant, and how these two pageants have influenced each other. Plus in hour 2, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house, and on this episode I'm featuring some Canadian disco, some 80s, as well as a spotlight on Canadian lesbian rock band Partner. So, when I return, Drag Queens and Beauty Queens, contesting femininity in the world's playground.
Bill 7, to ban discrimination in employment, government services, and housing, based on a person's sexual orientation, was up for a vote at Queen's Park. Most NDP and Liberal MPPs supported the bill, but without some progressive Conservative legislators backing, a divisive split could rack the province. 4 PCs decided to break party ranks to vote with their conscience and support Bill 7. Cabinet Minister and MPP Dennis Timbrell did it to show solidarity for his beloved brother, the well-known drag queen Rusty Ryan. And for me, a gay politician who was not yet out, I had to take a stand. We were known as the Gang of Four. I'm former Cabinet Minister and MPP Phil Gillies. The date, December 2nd, 1986, when LGBT rights came to Ontario.
Hi, I'm Saida Garrett, co-writer of Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mr. Mark Tara.
New York Avenue, where the party began. Mortimer breathes deeply and gestures broadly with his arms at the now vacant lots and rundown buildings on the west side of New York Avenue. The Saratoga was here, he points behind us. And the Chez Paris Disco. He turns and walks toward the world-famous boardwalk and makes a right on Westminster, commonly known as Snake Alley, a winding back street that connected New York, Kentucky, and Mount Vernon avenues in the old neighborhood. The parking lot to the right used to be the Entertainments Club, the oldest bar on the East Coast. Louise Mack, who loved gay people, owned the building, and the bottom floor was her little speakeasy nightclub, which always catered to gay men. It was one of those places where you had to knock on the door and have a code word to get in. Mortimer continues to walk, looking around, gesturing toward two large parking lots on the opposite side of the street, where the Grand Central Hotel and Studios 5 and 6 once stood before they burned down. He laughs as he kicks an abandoned beer bottle toward the curb. Gay rooming houses and hotels once choked the streets here, and it was all gay everywhere. He turns and frowns as he rounds another corner of the ghosts of properties where it was easy to pick up young men for sex and rent boys, especially in the 1980s. We turn onto Kentucky Avenue, where Snake Alley ends, now a devastated parking lot, as he describes the hotels and gay businesses that used to line the west side of the street. On the corner of Pacific and Kentucky Avenues, on the right-hand side was the coffee mill. On the left-hand side, the Atlantic City Electric Company. Across the street was Kelsey's Restaurant, and what used to be a pool hall and pizza parlor, rooming houses, a little gay grocery store. He pauses and points across the street to a small house, which still has a plant in the window. This is where drag queen Sandy Beach lived. Mortimer points to a little window where he remembers losing his virginity. He shakes his head, surveying the empty space. Turning right on Pacific Avenue, we walk past an empty lot, which was once Lyle's, a gay breakfast place where everybody ended up after staying out all night partying. Two prostitutes walk by, followed by their pimp arguing about cigarettes. Turning right, back down New York Avenue, he summons the ghosts of gay clubs once again, the Saratoga, the Chez, the Rendezvous, where he used to perform in drag, and where he saw his first gay sex inside the club, right on the dance floor. On the right side stood the Chester Inn, its restaurant called the Front Porch, and there was an underground club here called Pucalani with a pool. Across the street was an Italian restaurant, Mama Mott's, where he had his first gay date. It's all gone now.
Laurie Greene, hi, how are you?
I am fine. Thank you for asking me to be on your show today.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I have to say thank you for being here, to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. So thank you for that, Laurie Greene, especially to talk about drag queens and beauty queens contesting femininity in the world's playground. Interesting title for this book, Drag Queens and Beauty Queens. In a nutshell, tell me what the story is that you're telling in this book.
Well, the story is, and you shouldn't be afraid that this is like a thick academic book you're not going to be able to read, because it's part of my ethos that I write so that the community I write about can read it. So almost no jargon in the book. And it's a great story about the co-evolution of the iconic and famous Miss America pageant. And the drag version also contested originally here in Atlantic City, which is the Miss America pageant. And it was contested first in one of our bars in the early 1990s on New York Avenue in Atlantic City.
And that's essentially the story that you're telling, the connection between the two, essentially.
Yeah, and there's quite a strong connection that people don't know about.
Is it fair to say that this book is a history book, not necessarily a fictional story?
Correct. That's correct. It is a factual story. Everything that's in here is something that actually happened. It is told from the perspective of the drag queens and the other community members that participated in the original pageant and lived on New York Avenue in the gayborhood. And it's a work of anthropology. So that means that I am interviewing people directly. But anthropology is sort of an interesting science because most scientists go into the field and they already have a thesis that they're going to test and they do an experiment. We don't do that. I just go and live in a place, and then the sort of interesting story presents itself. The thesis presents itself to me. So I have the best job on earth, by the way. And when people ask me what I do, I say, I go and I live in places where drag queens are, and then I tell their stories. So, it's a lot better than like picking something, I don't know, like studying microbes or something in a lab. But yeah, it is a true story. And it's a story about how, straight washing of history, because the LGBTQ community here in Atlantic City has had so much influence on the pageant that has never been told before.
Interesting. For yourself, what inspired you to write about drag queens and beauty queens, these two pageants? Was there a flashpoint? Was there a moment that made you recognize that, hey, there's a story that connects these two pageants that hasn't been told? Was there a moment when that flash bulb went off for you?
Yeah, there was a moment. I actually volunteer as a board member on the Miss America pageant, which raises money. It's a charity organization. It raises money originally raised money for HIV and AIDS care in the early, the late 80s and the early 90s. But it's still a nonprofit organization. And when I sort of started going to more of the pageants, I realized that some of my friends were actually in this pageant. I was never like a huge drag fan. I was a drag fan, but not a huge one. And I thought, wow. And then I started thinking, Miss America and Miss America, someone must have written about this. There's obviously a story here. And when I found out nobody had, I went, oh my gosh, I have to look into this. I don't even know what the story is, but I know there's got to be something here because I knew the people that were involved in it. So it was also an interesting book for me to write uniquely because it's the first time I've actually written a book about people I know. Either they're my friends or my friendly acquaintances. And that is a whole can of worms that you might not imagine because you have to deal with every community has drama. Gay people have no drama. You know that. And it's the same here. And, it's just an interesting process writing about people you know and you admire in a way that's truthful, but also, is expressive of all the different truths, the different stories that they have about how this pageant evolved. And where it's going in the future.
So 2 beauty pageants, one great city, the Miss America pageant, I believe started in 1921, and the Miss America pageant, I believe started in 1994. In Drag Queens and Beauty Queens, you talk about how these two pageants, they influenced each other. Can you talk to me and give me some specifics about how that happened, what resulted in these two pageants influencing each other? Can you talk to me, give me some specifics of how that plays out?
Absolutely. So one thing that you might not think about is that even though the contestants from the Miss America pageant change every year, the people that work in the background don't. So they tend to be hairdressers, choreographers, costumers, production people. I would venture to say at least 80% of those people in the Miss America pageant are gay people. So what would happen was they would come every year for the Miss America season. And, in their off hours, they would go hang out in the gayborhood on New York Avenue, which was one of the most thriving gayborhoods ever on the East Coast. At one point in time in its heyday, just before the AIDS pandemic, we had 15 clubs in a 4-block area, 23 rooming houses, restaurants. I mean, it was just this like jam-packed party town 24/7. And so these people used to go, and there were friendships developed between the people that worked the pageant and the people that lived on New York Avenue and partied there. Many of the people that actually lived on New York Avenue were also volunteers for the Miss America pageant because it is run by local volunteers. It's very much a part of this city. It used to be, now it's gone. But so they developed these friendships. And so when the AIDS epidemic came, they needed to raise money. They needed to bring people's spirits up. More people died in Atlantic City in 2 years than any other place in this country during the AIDS pandemic. So it came late here, but when it came, it just wiped out a third of the gay population in the city. And wanting to do something, basically the gays went for what they knew: drag and pageantry. This is what they knew here. We're an entertainment city. And so they thought, okay, we're going to put on a pageant called the Miss America pageant. And the story was, well, the queens were supposed to be at the pageant, but for some reason they missed it. And there was always this sort of theme to each pageant. The story was why they missed it. And it would always be based on some local lore or pop culture, like they went down with the Titanic, or, they got stuck somewhere on one of the jitneys. It was always something that was always local humor, very campy, all local queens participating. You couldn't even get a seat in the bar that it was in. People were outside. At one point, they got called by the police because they thought the deck it was on was going to collapse. I mean, it was really something. Everybody came, not just gay people, the whole community, because this is a very small city. And then they Miss American contestants were told they weren't allowed to come to the pageant. It was contested the night before, the day after the Miss America pageant. And the idea was that the people who worked behind the stage could come to this pageant the next day. But the Miss America pageant contestants were told they were not allowed to go. And this is sort of a classic control feature of the cis female pageants. But what happened was that it started to influence the pageant in a myriad of ways. One of them is that there used to be a parade. There's a parade before the Miss America pageant. It's become known as the Show Us Your Shoes parade. You might have heard of it. What happens is traditionally it used to be called the Miss America parade. And the contestants would dress like debutantes in their evening gowns with white gloves on, and they'd sit in the back of convertibles, and there'd be this procession down the boardwalk. And they would wave, like the Miss America wave, like the Queen of England, and, with the name of their state on their car and their sash on. And on the either side of New York Avenue, which abuts the boardwalk, the Atlantic City boardwalk where the parade is, there were two rooming houses where gays and most of the drag queens lived, because they were raunchy rooming houses. And they would sit on the balconies and watch the parade go by. And one day they're looking down and they notice that the girls don't have any shoes on because their feet are in the car. They're wearing bedroom slippers. And they were just appalled by this. So they started reading them, and they started going, "Hey, show us your shoes, babe," and taunting them. And the pageant organizers told the girls, "Look, they're going to do this to you. Don't let yourself get frazzled. You're a Miss America. Just don't listen to them." And the screams got louder every year. Then they started having giant signs, watches, T-shirts, fireworks, skywriting in airplanes, "Show us your shoes." I mean, they really went all out. And eventually one of the contestants one year lifted her foot up in the car, and everyone went crazy on that corner. And eventually, a year or two later, the pageant gave in, and they trademarked the term "Show Us Your Shoes" and called it the Show Us Your Shoes parade, co-opting the name. And what the contestants started doing was decorating their shoes like their states and wearing these what could only be described as campy outfits that were spoofs of their states. So it became this like funny, campy parade. And so the parade was essentially queered, but that story is never told. It's talked about as a family-friendly, fun parade, the most iconic part of Miss America. People here didn't even know this story, except for people my age that participated in the origins of that parade, until I wrote the book. It says it nowhere on every website you look, official website, it has a family-friendly story about why it's called the Show Us Your Shoes parade.
Is that part of the straight washing that you talked about earlier? The fact
Absolutely.
that this history isn't necessarily known to the general public?
Exactly. It's just one piece of the straight washing that we're talking about. And I have a really interesting sidebar to this, which is I have a colleague who teaches it in San Antonio. Her name's Amy Stone. And she's written a book called Corny Nation about a fiesta, which is a spoof, a drag queer spoof on debutante parades in Texas. And they yell, "Show us your shoes." It's newer. It's newer than in Atlantic City. And I'm sure it came from here. And their story is that 3 hairdressers yelled it one day and it just stuck. And it has a similar trajectory to the one that Show Us Your Shoes does in Atlantic City. But we invented it first here.
So the Miss America pageant and the Missed America pageant, who owns these pageants?
I don't know who owns the Miss America pageant anymore. Again, it is run by committee. The Missed America pageant is owned by John Schultz and Gary Hill, who were the owners of Studio 6, which was where the pageant was first contested on New York Avenue. Since it's gone, I should say this, the pageant started out as very local, extremely campy, extremely low budget. They used to say it was so funny because it was so bad. Like we would have one rehearsal, and part of it being really bad, like the lip syncing was awful, like everything was awful. And people just loved it. And when it was always tied to Miss America. But when Miss America moved to Las Vegas, they just stopped having the pageant. It was like their muse left. And then about 10 years into Miss America leaving for Las Vegas, the Miss America pageant took over their venue in Boardwalk Hall and started contesting the pageant there. But now it had become a big production with professional hosts. Marcel Visage was the host that first year. But we always have a famous host. And now it's like an international pageant. And now it's contested at the Estes Arena in the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino, which is this giant venue. And it's televised. So it's no longer the pageant it used to be. And Miss America is not here anymore. So now it is the pageant everybody talks about in Atlantic City.
And the title, Drag Queens and Beauty Queens Contesting Femininity in the World's Playground. Is there a story behind this particular title?
Yeah. I really, I was interested not only in the story, but in sort of a comparison of drag pageants and traditional cis female beauty pageants. And I thought that the contrast and the comparison was just incredibly interesting and taught us a lot about gender and why people do drag. I myself am queer, but I know amongst, queer women, drag is not universally loved. Well, neither it is amongst men, but it's more so amongst gay men because they think it's mocking women. And one thing that I really strongly learned, and I think everyone has said it who I've spoken to do this book, is that drag is not about mocking or critiquing femininity. It's about mocking and critiquing how narrow masculinity is, and that women have this freedom to wear different clothes and change their hair and, be short or tall, and they can change the size of their boobs. They can do all these things in their presentations, and men can't, and they feel they're boring. So the idea that it's a critique more of the masculine and their own selves was something that, I really thought was interesting. And in the same way, how they view beauty pageants, because most of the queens that do pageantry, they love female beauty pageants. They love them. In most of the country, in the United States at least, Miss America is such an anachronism. People think it's ridiculous. They don't even know it still happens, some people. But amongst pageant queens, drag queens, it's like the Holy Grail. They admire these women. They talk about how talented they are, what it's like to have to get up there in a pair of heels and walk around and in a bathing suit and have confidence. But mostly they love Miss America because they interpret cis female beauty pageants from a camp sensibility. They believe that they are poking fun at themselves just like the drag queens are poking fun at masculinity. Now, I don't believe that the beauty queens think that, but the drag queens really do. And they admire them for those performances, their presentations of femininity that they've contrived in their minds. Camp and the queering of Miss America. The corner of New York Avenue and the boardwalk in Atlantic City Beach side is the girls' side of the street, the spot where lesbians congregate to watch the parade and cheer as the cars go by carrying the Miss America pageant contestants. On the opposite side of the boardwalk, gay men stand in front of Ripley's Believe It or Not museum waiting for the parade to begin. This year, there is an added intrigue since this is the first time an openly lesbian contestant, Miss Missouri Earner Flattery, is competing for the crown as America's ideal woman. Many spectators carry rainbow flags. Some are dressed in drag, men in full makeup, women donning T-shirts with men's chests and muscular arms painted on them. Others wear rainbow kitsch, plastic sunglasses, boas, crystal-studded crowns. Both men and women flirt with local police as they beg to stand pressed up against the parade route and promise they will behave in return. Drag queen Morgan Wells stands in a gown and a headpiece on the men's side. Beside her stands a man shirtless with pierced nipples attached to chains. Gay men congregate, sorted by age and acquaintance under the marquee of the museum. To their right quietly sits a family with beach chairs and 3 small tow-headed children on their laps. Shoebies, or out-of-towners as we call them, they gawk at the spectacle before them. The convertible carrying the Miss America contestants in the Show Us Your Shoes parade pass in alphabetical order. They wear costumes whimsically representing their states, with shoes held up in the air with one leg as they lean back in their seats and wave to the crowds. Show us your shoes is screamed from New York Avenue crowds as each contestant passes. And as they do, most of them met with cheers of encouragement, waving rainbow flags, while others receive sometimes not so flattering critiques of their tepid presentations. You on New York Avenue now, honey. You ain't in Kansas anymore, someone yells in the crowd. A baton twirling team from Kentucky approaches. The young girls dressed in rainbow-colored leotards draw near, and the excitement among onlookers builds. They all respond by waving their rainbow flags and chanting, "Twirl, girl, twirl. Twirl, girl, twirl," as they jump up and down and continue to wave their flags. The twirlers, a little disconcerted, perform their number. Flags begin waving and people push in toward the yellow cones along the parade route. Miss Missouri Earner Flaherty is dressed in a blue and white baseball uniform and holding up a pair of bejeweled high-top sneakers. As the convertible nears, the cheers increase. She smiles, but she is demure as she waves. Jean runs toward the car waving her rainbow flag. And though Erin smiles and waves back, she appears a bit awkward with this group of locals looking for some acknowledgement of their shared identity. The crowd chants, "Show us your shoes."
And on that note, we will return after this Rainbow Country update.
Hi, I'm Justin Ling, author of Missing from the Village. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
So, drag queens and beauty queens, this isn't your first book. You've also written books on yoga. When for yourself, when did you recognize that you had a knack, you had a talent for writing?
Well, I am an anthropologist of embodiment. That means I study human beings and their experiences in their bodies. So my books range, it seems like they're disconnected, right? So I have a book, for example, on how language moves with immigrants from place to place in their bodies. I have the book on yoga is about the ways that people try to have ecstatic experiences using their body as a vehicle. Most of my writing is about drag, though, because it's my people, and I'm very interested in my community, and I love my community, and I love writing about them and finding out about them. But also, obviously, drag is an example of using your body in order to explore, in this case, or maybe unsettle. And writing's what I have to do. So if people like my writing, I'm thrilled, by the way.
Staying on the yoga topic for a minute, you and I have something in common because we both loved yoga. At least I did at one point.
Oh, wow.
I studied it. I even went to, I call it an ashram. I studied Kripalu yoga, and the ashram or the ashram was in Lenox, Massachusetts. For yourself, when did you discover your love for yoga?
Well, I have to tell you, I grew up in a yoga family. My uncle ran a Shivananda ashram in Philadelphia. So I almost was forced into it. As a child, I wasn't a very well-behaved child. I had a little bit of a problem with maybe I should have been on Ritalin if I wasn't as old as I am. And my mother was adamant that I went to a particular teacher who was very strict, so that I would get some discipline, sort of like other kids take karate. I took yoga. And then, I just always practiced. I was quite good as a child. And there weren't a lot of children practicing. And so I went on to assist for some very well-known yogis before it was popular, and then started teaching. I actually owned at one time 5 studios, and ran them aside from my job. And this particular book I wrote with a longtime friend and colleague of mine, Edward Clark, who's the originator of quite a famous style of yoga called Tripsikari, which is out of London. So this is sort of a book that we were, thinking about writing for about 30 years. But when the pandemic hit, we went, well, we don't have an excuse now. So we sat down on Zoom and just sort of cranked it out, all of our thoughts for the last almost over 40 years of practicing and teaching. So it was really an interesting thing for me to do, because I'm also quite a critic of yoga, of contemporary yoga. So it was a really interesting process for me to do, and I really enjoyed it.
So you are an author. You are a teacher of yoga. You're also an associate professor of anthropology at Stockton University. So anthropology, what led you down this path? How did you get turned on to anthropology, of all things?
I like to say that people go into psychology because they're nuts, and they want to figure out why. I came from a family where we didn't know anything about our history. My parents didn't tell us anything for various reasons. My mother's side of the family were criminals. That's probably why they didn't tell us where they were from. And my father, he was an immigrant, and he insisted he didn't remember, although we sort of know he did. But I say I went into anthropology because I always never felt like I had a culture. I wasn't raised with any religion or any sense of my background or my heritage. And I say I went into anthropology because I became interested in other people's cultures, as a way of figuring out who I was. And again, I tell everybody I have the greatest job on earth. I really do. I mean, I basically go around and talk to people and learn about their lives. And then I get to give that back to them by writing about it. I mean, Drag Queens and Beauty Queens is actually an anthropological work. It is what we call an ethnography, which is a description of a culture. And the idea that what we try to do as anthropologists is I don't write to tell you a story. I write so that you feel like you're in that story, going through it and experiencing it. So people tell me their story, and then I tell back that story in their own words, right? I let their voice be the story, be the speaker in the story. And the idea is that you are sort of sensorially drawn into the story, so you feel like you were there, like you're eavesdropping. Maybe that's a good analogy. their conversations and watching them when you're actually in the theater, watching the shows, or backstage, seeing them get ready, or walking down the boardwalk, listening to two older guys talk about what used to be. And it's those kind of moments that, it's the reading of anthropology is more like, I sometimes call it creative nonfiction, because it's true, but it reads more like fiction than a history book does.
Mm. So in Drag Queens and Beauty Queens, you write about drag as part of the gay community in Atlantic City, but it's more male focused. What can you talk to me about that? Like, what are you getting at when you say that?
Okay, yeah. Well, somebody joked with me when I was writing this book and said, "Oh, you're finally writing a book about the community that you're part of." And I said, well, that's true, except I can't think of a more male community than the one I'm studying, and I'm not male. In fact, when I told the lesbians here, my friends, that I was going to be doing this book, I said, yeah, I'm going to be working, on New York Avenue with the drag queens, and they called it the Dick Farm. That is how much they consider it a male venue, a male context. But, drag has drag, we know how much we know about drag queens compared to drag kings, right? Drag queens have always been more popular, always been more of a force. I would say they're like sort of on the front lines of gender and the conflicts that surround the gay community. They're unapologetically gay. When you go out there in the world dressed up like a woman in heels and obviously not a woman, you're not a female impersonator, you're not trans, you're not trying to pass, you're just being gay, that's unapologetic, So when I say that, and it's just a male venue. It's a very, very male context for interacting. Now, nowadays, I think it's great that drag kinging is becoming very slowly more popular. And in fact, I hope to do, I king myself. I've done it a few times and I loved it, had a blast. And, I have a drag king name.
What is it?
It's Tony Pepperoni.
Okay.
And you see, it would be even funnier if you were from Atlantic City, because we have a very famous restaurant here that's been here forever called Tony Baloney's. I thought Tony Salami was a little too heavy-handed, so I went with pepperoni. I also weigh like 100 pounds.
Do you use a pepperoni at all?
I have used a pepperoni. I have.
Okay.
Yeah. Ruined a pair of pants that way. But anyway, I am thrilled to see, we are getting more bio queens, and we're getting more trans queens and drag kings. But, the majority of drag is still male focused. Look what you see on RuPaul. Look who people know as in drag. They're mostly men, So that's what I mean when I say it's a male venue. And the language of camp and camp sensibility, it arises out of this drag culture, and it probably accounts for the reason that camp is such a gay male sensibility. It's not so much a gay female sensibility, even though I love camp, But, that's what I mean when I say it's a male venue.
So we have bears, we have leather, we have lesbians, we have twinks, we have femmes, we have trans, and more, all part of the LGBT community. But I think it's fair to say that historically, they haven't all seen eye to eye. In Drag Queens and Beauty Queens, you write about the conflicts within the LGBT community. Can you talk to me about what you discovered while researching Drag Queens and Beauty Queens?
Yeah, well, one of the things I discovered was just briefly one thing I already mentioned, which is that gay women tend not to be universally, and admiring of drag, or even liking to go watch it. But I don't know that that's a conflict. I think the larger conflicts come generationally. For example, one of the things that the Miss America pageant had to deal with, much like its counterpart, right? It's drag mother. I call the Miss America pageant, it's drag mother, because it's what really spawned it, and what they look up to and model themselves after. The Miss America pageant had trouble with change, with evolving. It took them a long time to figure out, people don't really want to see women objectified on a stage walking around in a bathing suit and heels. Like, that doesn't work anymore. And so much so that they've probably made themselves, something that is going to no longer exist pretty soon. And the Miss America pageant has a similar challenge, which is that they did not allow trans women to be in the pageant. They had rules that said you had to be born and be still physically a male. You could not have any surgery or take hormones or anything like that. And long after that became something that was now tone deaf, right? Out of sync with the way the community was evolving. And so they had their own challenge. Were they going to change, or were they going to go the way of Miss America, and not be relevant anymore? And the community was really split here. The older queens, and I, totally understand this, so felt, look, the whole idea of drag is that you have to create the illusion, right? You have to create it. But if you're a trans woman or a woman, you already have these parts. You don't have to create the illusion. And it's not the same thing. Like, that was their perspective of why that shouldn't happen. And, my perspective and other people's perspective was, well, I'm a woman and I can't get up there and win this pageant. That's what I said to them. I'd still have to get up there. I'd still have to be over the top, right? And a gross exaggeration of my femininity. I'd still have to be able to perform, right? I'd still have to know all of the language of drag, the references, right? That make judging, make the judges pick me, because it's not just how well I sing. That's not what a drag pageant is about, right? There are references, there's lip syncing, there are icons that you reference that people laugh about. And I said, you still have to get up there and do it. You still have to get up there and perform and be in drag. Eventually, just this last year, they did change the rules after missing a year for the pandemic. But that is probably the major conflict, was between the older, more traditional drag artists and the younger ones, whose conversation about gender, frankly, has completely changed, from what it was when I was coming up gay,
Mm-hmm. I think that can be a conversation for a whole other episode.
Oh my gosh,
within itself. Why do you think drag is so synonymous with the LGBT community?
Well, I think it's because, again, drag, it is a way to be unapologetically gay. It's like saying, I'm not hiding. I'm not just going to be gay. I'm going to be like super gay. And I'm not just going to be super gay. I'm going to be over the top super gay, and I'm going to shove it in your face. It also is a turnaround, of the power relationships between straight and gay people. And one of the, a lot of the queens would mention, for example, there's always a few straight guys that come in to see the drag show. Usually their girlfriends drag them in, no pun intended. And they, they'll sit them in the front row so that the queens will just torture them. It's coming. They're going to torture them. And it's because it's like you're saying, this is my house now. And in my house, guess who has the power? Not you. It's totally turned around, I do think that there is not all drag is subversive like that. Not all drag intends to challenge our ideas about sexuality and sexual orientation and gender. But I think most drag does, it certainly has the potential to do that. And I think that that's how it has gotten so, to be so integral, to the LGBTQ community. People often say stuff like that. They're like, why do you always have to have a drag queen at an LGBTQ event, And I do think that's why it is, because drag says everything we want to say and then some to you, and to the straight community. as well as to ourselves. It's like an affirmation and sort of like a wallowing in pleasure of who we are, of our identity as being different. And I think that's why drag is popular with people.
With the rise of drag in mainstream culture, especially in 2022, especially because of the rise of RuPaul's Drag Race. I mean, today we even have, drag kids. I don't know how you feel about that, but in your opinion, how do you see in 2022 the evolution of drag? For you personally, how do you see it?
This is such a big question, and I just tackle this a little bit in the book because, the influence that RuPaul's Drag Race has had is it's immeasurable, right? I mean, it's completely transformed drag from a subversive gay bar scene into popular culture.
For good and bad.
For good and bad. Now, one of the good things is, and, one of my queens said to me, I can now ask, and I can't say it out loud because mine will talk, that woman whose name begins with an A, who lives in my house with me, who I'm not sleeping with, I can ask her, what is a drag queen? And she will just give me a definition. That's how much popular culture it is, right? And also, he said, I'm on an airplane once, one of my queens, I think it was Margot Hayes, and it was Mimi on first. She was on an airplane once, and she was traveling for a show, and someone said, what are you doing? And she said, well, I'm a drag queen. And the woman didn't go, oh my God, what's that? Like they used to. She just started going, oh, you know who my favorite queen is? And he said, it's so cool that I don't have to explain myself anymore. So those are some of the positive things, right? And that and frankly, the drag queens can get work, and earn a living in some cases. That's also a good thing. And that it's given visibility to the LGBTQ community. And if people like drag, there's a possibility that in the context of watching drag shows, and many queens talked about this, people can gain empathy for our community and learn who we are. And homophobia can be diminished in that way. So those are all good things, right? Some of the negative things, well, when something becomes pop culture, by definition, it loses its power, right? It's pop. It loses its subversive quality to a great extent. And it also becomes, I don't want to use the term mediocre, but when everybody's a drag queen, a whole lot of them aren't really very good, And so instead of having just like every show you go to be amazing, now you've got sort of a lot of, watered down versions of drag that are cleaned up. They're not as campy. They're not as in your face. And that was the purpose of them. You know what I mean? So I think that's a diminishment of it. And one of the things the Queen said to me that I wouldn't even have thought of is that because it used to be like, and this is very true about Miss America, you really saw this. You know how the girls used to make their outfits? They would go to like a thrift store and buy a bunch of 45 records and make a dress out of it, or take the stuffing out of a stuffed animal and like stuff it in their stockings for hips. And they didn't spend money. They just put together like a wig that looked like they just woke up, and it was like hysterical. But nowadays you can't get away with that. You have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars because RuPaul has created a standard of, it's narrowed the possibilities for what a drag queen can look like, what their performance can be like, because it's become a popularized kind of performance and entertainment. And they have to look a certain way. They have to look like women. They have to spend a lot of money on these gowns. They have to have a certain level of performance. And I think the narrowing of those options is definitely, as well as the inability for some people to be able to participate because of the cost. And also I've heard them say too, it's hard for people to get work if they haven't been,
if they're not popular.
Queen. Yeah, if they haven't been a RuPaul queen. So a lot of local queens are like, well, screw this. Mm-hmm. I can't even get work in my own bar anymore because they just want the RuPaul queens who are traveling around.
I've heard.
And I think all of those things are definitely negatives that I guess RuPaul did not intend when he created Drag Race.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think that it's he's to blame. RuPaul is to blame. I think it's just, the commercialization of something.
Yeah, I would agree. It's, and when you make something pop, it's like pop music, by definition, it's sort of bubblegum, and then not to say there isn't great drag out there, because there is, but it's again, there's a lot more of that pop drag, and a lot more queens that look exactly the same and do exactly the same thing. And personally, I find that boring. This is just a personal taste. There's so many great performers out there. I still love the campy queen who looks like she just woke up and her wig's half off. That's still my favorite kind of performance that I enjoy the most.
So for yourself, Laurie, once people read your book, what would you like your audiences to come away with after reading Drag Queens and Beauty Queens?
Wow. Yeah, there are things. One of the things I would like people to come away with, first of all, is a real appreciation for the serious and important nature of drag performance, and the possibilities that it has. And another thing I'd like them to come away with is to know that one of the other functions of drag is that drag is a place where people that don't easily fit into the gay community. Gay men can be pretty tyrannical about what you have to look like in order to be successful in the gay community. And most of the queens that I know, the traditional queens, they were never people that were particularly had, nice body, like the gym body, before AIDS, or that were pretty boys, and this was a way for them to fit in, to get a place and get status. Even though they're playing women, which you think would make them lose status, it was a way for them to gain power and status in their own community, where they may have been, sort of geeky and didn't fit in. But not only that, even more than that, drag traditionally, but still today, not as much, but traditionally, yes, and still in the minority communities, is a place where people make intentional families. Drag families are places where drag mothers, like established drag queens, will take kids off the street, that don't have homes, that have been kicked out, that don't, that feel lost, that might be on drugs, that might have other things going on. And they teach them the craft and how to be men, how to be strong, independent gay men, or strong, independent gay Black men in particular. And it's such a beautiful thing when you see it, not just the people that say, oh, this is my drag family and it's just symbolic, but the ones where it really is. I can't tell you how important and moving that was for me. And I think the third thing I'd like people to come away with is the importance of the gay community, that the stories that are never told and the influences that we have in every community that we're in. If not for straight washing, these stories would be told, but they will be told more and more. And I guess the last thing is how important place is, your sense of place and where you live, and the meaning of a street, that holds nostalgia, even though it doesn't exist anymore. It was just destroyed with the casinos and bombed out, and then the neighborhood's gone, but people still feel so strongly about it, and how much that was a part of Atlantic City. The community itself was created at a time when Atlantic City was thriving. The gay community was thriving as well. And those are the things I think I'd love for people to take away from reading this book. And just the joy of it all, really, the joy of it all.
Laurie Greene, thank you so much for being here. Well said, well done, well written.
Thank you. I'm so happy to have been here. Thank you for having me. Show us your shoes, not your midriffs. Mimi on first stands at the top of the risers as she enters wearing a 12-foot-long purple bejeweled velvet octopus stole with arms wrapped around her torso and dragging down the steps behind her. Hair high in a platinum blonde bouffant, her lips bright red, Mimi cocks her head, turns, and drops the stole coyly, revealing a sparkling black velvet swimsuit and a gold and purple shell accessories. She struts, turns her back to the audience and winks. A finger goes to her lips as if to say, oh my, I'm so exposed. She seems oblivious to her fatness, In fact, she shows a confidence in her superior form, her extra-large body jiggling, hands on her hips accentuating her simple frame. Mimi walks down the runway, stopping at the end. She licks her lips slowly, turns, and walks back to center stage, moving her hips slowly to the music. Mimi on first. Contestant number 1 is announced, along with her measurements, 72, 48, 72. The crowd cheers and applauds, and she bends over slowly, paws and bottom to the audience to retrieve her stole. As Mimi is escorted away by Speedo-clad male dancers, the next contestant begins to descend. Farrah Mascara steps gracefully, one stilettoed foot after the other in a sequined red robe. As she reaches the stage, her robe falls away, revealing a red cutout sequin swimsuit, fishnet stockings, and a giant lobster-clawed hands as gloves. She moves her thumbs, pinching the air, flashing an open-mouthed, toothy smile. She shakes her head side to side, her huge hair just seconds behind her. Farrah struts from one side to the other as she makes her way down the runway, ending in a figure 8, pinching claws held high. She shimmies and jiggles her large body, putting one claw to her mouth in feigned embarrassment. Miss Farrah Mascara, contestant number 2. Her favorite food is chicken nuggets. Her favorite color is the rainbow. Farrah squeals and grabs the arm of one of her escorts as the next contestant appears at the top of the risers in a gold lame robe cinched around her waist. Tina Burner descends in sparkly white platform shoes and reveals her swimsuit, white and skirted, with a gold belt and an anchor and gold tasseled epaulets on her shoulders. Tina's ginger hair is coiffed 1950 style, and she holds a captain's nautical cap. Posing, one knee bent, arms by her side, wrist flex, head cocked to one side, she walks slowly to the top of the runway and puts one white-gloved hand to her mouth as she knocks her knees together and giggles. Tina Burner, contestant number 3. Her favorite perfume is fishy.
On Google Reads and on Amazon.ca, Drag Queens and Beauty Queens has a 5 out of 5 star rating. For even more on this author and her writings, LaurieAGreene.com.
Hi, my name is Joanne Vanicola, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I was first on Rainbow Country with Mark Tara on discussing the massacre at Pulse Club in Orlando. I realized how important it was for our community to have a radio station, specifically for our issues, to talk about people in the LGBTQ community and to provide an outlet for our stories, to discuss our politics, culture, and give voice to the issues that matter to us. And of course our artists and the things that we do globally and talk about culture. And without people like Mark Tara providing a space for this with a radio show like this, then we wouldn't have that voice. So support, tune in. Thank you.
And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, head over to marktara.com, where everything is connected, and hit the archives banner. Don't forget to keep up to date with the show. Follow me on socials at Mark Tara. The podcast is available on all major platforms. And finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, stay well and stay safe.
Hi, this is Police Constable Danielle Botno, also known as LGBT Cop, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.